There are so many things right about Kei vehicles, and there's some things that are lacking. Based off all the vehicles in the United States, they fall into the 25-year rule, and they're being outlawed in a whole bunch of states. Not because they're not safe, but because we feel that they are infringing upon big auto because they're so awesome. There are some things that kind of suck about them though. The seats are not comfortable, they're not very fast, and they lack power. And what we're going to talk about today is the suspension. So we're going to film this as we do it. We haven't started disassembly. We have looked at the parts and stuff and made some preliminary decisions, but we're going to do this as we do it and let you guys see the process. This way, if we run into problems, you guys can all sit there and go, wow, you guys are a bunch of idiots. I wouldn't have done that. And maybe it might open up your eyes if you guys decide to take on this endeavor. So our suspension is on a 26-year-old vehicle that has over 100,000 miles on it. And we're pretty sure it's the original suspension that came with the vehicle. And driving it in the wind, and we're windy here, is next to just being terrifying. I'll give you an example of how bad it is. And when you close the door, so Oni is a tray van. So the thing they did very different is they put just springs in the back, while the pickup trucks had leaf springs. But in the front are both McPherson struts. So we figured out 3 options to upgrade, replace our suspension. The first one was to just replace the stock OEM struts. And I think you can get them from GNR Imports, I think for 170 bucks. But they wouldn't be really good with off-roading. And if we ever decided to put on bigger tires, if we got more horsepower, we'd have to go back and redo this all again. The second option was to sit down and re-engineer the entire front suspension and find a donor vehicle that would work. And then the problem with that is it's a no-brainer that we don't want to do this, or it's a no-starter that we don't want to do this because of all the math. There's so much math that goes into the geometry to re-engineer or make a suspension work, from toe-in, camber, caster, Ackmans. I mean, it goes on and on and on of all the things. I'll put a list of all those things you have to know to build a suspension or modify one. The last was to go coilovers. And coilovers do basically the same job of McPherson strut. The only difference is usually they're very adjustable. So we found ones that had dampener control and height adjustment. In looking at all the research and finding, we found 2 really good sources, actually 3, but 2 was Wess Pierce, I think it is. Wess did an actual coilover swap with Velociraptor, Honda Velociraptor. No, it's Velastar. But we're gonna call it Velociraptor because Velociraptor sounds cooler. So the Velociraptor is a 2,800 pound vehicle, has curb weight, and Oni is a 1,900 pound curb weight. So the problem is that the Velastar or the Velociraptor, they're saying that they wanted a 6K front end spring and then a 4K rear spring. That's really a lot of compression for our small van. The other person we looked at was MotoCheez, and he went through a crap ton of money buying springs to try to get the right spring rate and ride. So he took his McPherson struts, put on different springs, and then he did a block lift to give him the actual suspension lift. And what he ended up eventually going to, his last thing, was a 350 pound per inch progressive spring, and he said it was awesome. So because of the coilover, and as you compress it, you get more and more and more, it gets tighter, just like a spring does. We figured that a 5K spring on Oni would be about perfect once we compressed it down small enough that it'll fit. So here's our fancy dancy BC Racing Velociraptor coilovers. One of the big things is these bolts are supposed to pretty much line up exactly onto Oni. But what Wes found is that his bolt hole was right about here. So he ended up having to cut the bottom part of this bottom tube. Hopefully with this having an extension, we won't have to. We'll find out once we get there. So with that said, first thing is remove the struts. Second thing is we got to figure out our front plate and how we're going to mount this and modify, and then hook it all up, and then make sure we meet clearance, and then we'll go do an awesome test run. Here we go. Before we tear it all apart, we wanted to get a measurement to have at least some starting point in the front and then in the back.
23 and
5/8.
5/8.
24 3/4. We also measured the lift point in the center. Motherfucker. Come on. Really? That's why I fucking hate this tape measure. So that is at 7 1/4 to see what kind of gains we'll get in ground clearance. Then it's pretty straightforward. Jack Oni up, take the wheels off, and remove the old struts. Because of the way this dog ear's down, I think that's
so
going to be
similar.
so close.
That's gonna be.
If we have to ream this side out, we will, but
it's
that's
gonna
going to be
fit.
fitting down, and I don't think we're going to hit. Because our van has an off-center transfer case, the CV axles are at different angles. And as we get into full drop, it changes the clearance between the axle and the struts. Wes had to cut his coilover to clear his CV axles. At this point, we're not sure if we will have to. Okay, now that our anxiety is lessened, and we really think this will work, and we didn't waste $1,200 on BC Racing BR Series coilovers for a Velociraptor, let's install these. We were hopeful that this would be simple, like most things in life, and we could just slide it into the holes.
So we're just done with phrasing, right? That's not a thing anymore?
But like most things, it never is. There was a lot of trial and error, lots of measuring and discussion on what or how would be the best way to make these fit. We also wanted to make sure that we had as much camber control as possible. Finally, once we had it all aligned the best we think we could, we drilled it out. And then we did a test fit. After we got the right side done, we used some thin cardboard to make a template for the other side by doing a rubbing sketch. We verified all the points with a tape measure. Then once it was marked, we drilled out the new holes. We mounted everything, and then we looked at our clearance on the left side. Its tolerances are really tight.
That's what she said.
We're going to need to really keep an eye on this and potentially do some modifications in the future. Once everything was buttoned back up and the tires on, we got a new measurement to see how the ride changed. So 26 at 9 3/4. We gained about 2.5 inches, and we think that this will probably settle to about 2 inches once the springs seat and we figure out the camber adjustment. So I'm going to push this almost all the way in. Okay, let's go do a test run. If we were going to do this again, we would have probably fabricated new top mounts. This way we can make a perfect fit, instead of trying to use a component that is not specifically made for our van. Well, maybe in the future. Now we just need a CNC and other awesome toys. Someday. We have an alley behind our house, and a decent little curb. This curb is now our little scientific testing facility. The plan is to see how Oni does going over the curb at a set speed. Our first run is at
15 kilometers per hour.
or 9.32057 miles per hour.
with the shock dampeners on the softest setting. Our second run is at the same speed, but with the dampeners at the hardest setting. We still need to put the rear springs and shocks on. And take Oni Kikai to the mountains.